The alien girl didn't scream when they threw stones at her children. She didn't run when the crowd circled closer. She just pulled her babies tighter to her chest and whispered something in a language that sounded like breaking glass, and that's when Silas Kane realized everything his world had taught him about monsters was a lie. The rain fell in sheets that night, mixing with the neon glow of advertising holograms that promised better lives, cleaner futures, perfect tomorrows. The promises never reached the lower districts. Down here in the shadow-gutted streets beneath, the skyways where hovercars hummed like distant wasps. The rain just made everything colder. Silas pulled his worn jacket tighter and kept his head down. Beside him, Rex limped along, the old German shepherd's gray muzzle low, ears pinned back against the downpour. 14 years they'd walked these streets together. 14 years since the factory explosion that had taken everything. Elena's laugh. Marcus's small hand in his. The apartment that smelled like cinnamon on Sunday mornings. 14 years of existing in the empty space between living and dying. His shift at the recycling plant had run long. Third time this week. The machines kept breaking down, and Silas was the only one who could coax them back to life. Not because he was skilled, he wasn't, but because he was patient. And patience was cheap labor in a world that ran on speed. Rex stopped suddenly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" The dog's ears perked forward, focused on the mouth of an alley. Between a shuttered noodle shop and a pawnbroker's cage, the holographic signs cast everything in alternating blues and reds, like the whole world was caught in an eternal police siren. Then Silas heard it, a whimper, small, afraid. He should have kept walking. In the lower districts, you learned quickly that curiosity was a luxury that got you killed, robbed or disappeared. But Rex was already moving toward the sound, and Silas had learned long ago that his dog's instincts were better than his own. The alley smelled like wet concrete and decay. Trash bins overflowed with the detritus of lives lived on the margins, and there, huddled against the far wall beneath a torn tarp that did nothing to stop the rain, was a shape that made Silas's breath catch. She was thin, impossibly thin, with skin that held a faint luminescence even in the darkness, like moonlight trapped underwater. Her hair, if you could call it that, seemed to shift colors in the neon glow, moving between deep purple and midnight blue. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Large, almond-shaped, filled with such profound exhaustion that Silas felt it in his own bones. She wasn't human, and clutched against her chest, shivering in rags that might have once been clothes, were two children. Babies, really. The smaller one couldn't have been more than 2 years old, its tiny face pressed against the girl's shoulder. The other, maybe 6 or 7, stared at Silas with eyes that had already seen too much. Rex approached slowly, tail low but not aggressive. The alien girl tensed, pulling her children closer. Silas saw her lips move, a warning, a prayer, he couldn't tell. The sound that emerged was like wind chimes breaking. Beautiful and terrible at once. "Easy," Silas said softly, holding up his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't believe him. Why would she? In the 3 years since the Cathera fleet had appeared in Earth's orbit, not to invade, but fleeing something worse, something they wouldn't name, humanity had shown its true face. The Cathera weren't warriors. They were refugees, survivors of a genocide that had consumed their entire system. They'd come begging for sanctuary. Earth's answer had been swift and brutal. No, the fleet had been turned away, but some had made it to the surface, hidden in cargo holds, smuggled by sympathetic traders, desperate enough to risk anything. Earth's governments had declared them illegal, dangerous, less than human. The propaganda feeds ran constant loops. Aliens steal jobs. Aliens carry disease. Aliens threaten our children. Most people believed it. Silas had believed it once. It was easier than thinking, easier than questioning, easier than caring. The older child coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Silas wince. Even from 5 feet away, he could see the fever-bright shine in the kid's eyes. "The little one's sick," he said. The alien girl's expression didn't change, but her grip tightened, protecting, always protecting. Silas looked down at Rex. The dog had settled onto his haunches, watching the family with an expression Silas recognized, the same look Rex had given Marcus when his son had nightmares, the same patient gentleness that said, "I will not harm you, I am safe." "I have food," Silas said. "Not much. Some protein bars. Water, there's A shelter in my apartment building's basement. It's warm, at least. The girl's eyes narrowed, calculating, weighing. What choice did she have? Really? Stay here and watch her children freeze, starve, die, or trust a human? One of the species that had already condemned her kind to extinction? Please, Silas added, and he wasn't sure why that word slipped out. He hadn't said please in years. Hadn't asked for anything, hadn't hoped for anything. Just for tonight. The rain's not stopping. The younger child whimpered again, and something in that sound broke whatever wall the girl had built. She nodded once, a small defeated movement. Getting them to his apartment required navigating 6 blocks through streets, where any surveillance drone, any patrol, any citizen looking to collect the bounty on illegal aliens could end everything. Silas gave the girl his jacket, pulled the hood up to shadow her features. She was roughly human-shaped. That's what made the Cathera so unsettling to people. That uncanny valley of almost but not quite. But up close, the differences were clear. The slight luminescence of her skin, the way her joints bent just a fraction differently, the 2 large eyes that reflected light like a cat's. Rex walked ahead, a living early warning system. The old dog had survived this long by knowing when danger approached. Tonight he kept them to the shadows, the forgotten spaces between the lit world and the dark one. Silas's apartment was a single room on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned 20 years ago. The walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every crying child, every life bleeding out in real time, but it was his and the lock worked, and the radiator usually sputtered heat when he coaxed it. The alien girl stood in the doorway, her children pressed against her legs, and surveyed the space with those enormous eyes. What did she see? The narrow bed with its threadbare blanket? The kitchenette with its single working burner? The view of another building's wall, so close Silas could touch it if he leaned out the window. This was poverty. Human poverty. But to her, it might be paradise because it had a door that locked and a roof that didn't leak. Sit, Silas said, gesturing to the bed. The only chair was held together with duct tape, and he didn't trust it with her weight plus the children's. She moved carefully, never taking her eyes off him, never relaxing. The older child, the sick one, let out another rattling cough that shook their whole body. Up close, under the apartment's dim lighting, Silas could see the child's skin had lost its luminescence, turning a dull gray-green. That cough, he said. How long? The girl's mouth opened, and for a moment no sound came out. Then, in halting, broken English, 4 days, maybe 5. Cold became worse. Her accent was strange. Each word carefully, shaped as if language itself was a foreign concept her mouth struggled to form. But she was trying. God, she was trying so hard. Silas filled a pot with water and set it to boil. Tea. He had tea somewhere, the cheap kind that came in bulk packets. And protein bars, 3 of them left from his ration. He set them on the bed beside her. Eat, he said. Both of you. The younger child grabbed a bar immediately, tiny fingers tearing at the wrapper with desperate hunger. But the older one just looked at it, then up at their mother, waiting for permission. The girl broke the bar in half, gave 1 piece to each child, kept nothing for herself. You too, Silas said. She shook her head. When did you last eat? She didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. Rex padded over, settled himself at the foot of the bed, close enough to provide warmth, but not so close as to intrude. The younger child reached out tentatively, touched the dog's fur, made a sound of delight, pure and innocent and utterly incongruous with everything else. His name's Rex, Silas said. He won't hurt you. The girl watched the interaction, and for the first time, something in her expression softened. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the distant possibility of it. Her name was Lyria. It took 3 days before she told him that. 3 days of Silas leaving for his shifts at the plant and returning to find her and the children, exactly where he'd left them, as if they were afraid that moving, existing too loudly, would shatter this fragile sanctuary. 3 days of the older child, Kale. His name was Kale, growing weaker despite the warmth, despite the food Silas bought with money he didn't have. 3 days of Silas remembering what it felt like to have someone depending on him. On the 4th morning, he woke to find Lyria standing at the window, the younger child, Sarah, asleep in the bed behind her. The sun was rising, painting the dirty glass in shades of amber and rose, and in that light Lyria looked almost human. Almost, but not quite. Never quite. Thank you, she said quietly. You did not have to help us. Silas shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Wasn't right leaving you in the rain. Most humans would have. She turned to face him, and there was something ancient in her eyes. Something that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Most humans have. He didn't argue. Couldn't argue. It was true. Kyle needs medicine, he said instead. Real medicine, not just tea and hope. There's a clinic in the mid-districts that asks fewer questions. No. The word was sharp, final. Clinic's report. Government tracks. They find us, She trailed off, but Silas could fill in the rest. Deportation if she was lucky. The bounty system if she wasn't. Cathara refugees were worth 5,000 credits. Dead or alive. The or alive was just window dressing. Everyone knew the processing centers were one-way trips. Then what? Silas asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. Watch him get worse? Watch him? He couldn't finish the sentence. Lyria's shoulders sagged. On my world, we had medicine that could cure anything. Light-based healing, molecular regeneration. But here, she gestured helplessly at the grimy apartment at Earth itself. Here we have nothing. Why did you come? The question came out harsher than he intended. If you knew it would be like this. Because the alternative was death. Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact. The Vrel came to Cathara when I was young. They didn't want our planet for resources. They wanted us gone. Erased. They burned our cities, poisoned our oceans, hunted us through the ruins of everything we'd built. We sent ships, hundreds of ships, begging every system we could reach for sanctuary. And Earth said no. Earth said worse than no. Earth said your genocide is not our problem. She looked back at the window, at the city that glittered with wealth and technology and absolute indifference. Some of us made it here anyway. We thought, maybe if we could just survive, just stay invisible long enough, maybe humanity would see we were not so different, that we were just people trying to live. But we didn't see that. You saw invaders, threats, something less than human, which made it easier to let us starve. Silas thought of the propaganda feeds, the speeches about protecting Earth's interests, the casual cruelty of people who would step over a dying alien child without breaking stride. He thought of himself 3 weeks ago, believing those same lies because believing was easier than caring. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Lyria's smile was sad and ancient. You are one person, one kind person in a sea of millions who are not. Your sorry changes nothing. Maybe, Silas grabbed his jacket, but I can still get medicine. There's a guy in the lower districts, sells black market supplies. No questions, no records. You will be risking. I know what I'm risking. He looked at Kale, small and fever-bright and fading. It's worth it. The dealer operated out of a condemned warehouse near the old port. The kind of place where laws went to die and people asked for what they needed in whispers. Silas had been here once before, years ago, when Rex had gotten an infection and the vet prices were beyond his reach. The man, wiry, tattooed eyes that missed nothing, remembered him. Kane, he said. Thought you were dead. Not yet. Silas approached the makeshift counter, a sheet of plywood across 2 barrels. Need antibiotics, the strong kind, and fever reducers. For your dog? Does it matter? The dealer studied him, then smiled, a knowing, ugly expression. Depends on what you're willing to pay. Regular prices or desperate prices? Silas set down everything in his pockets. 63 credits, half a week's salary. This is what I have. That'll buy you aspirin and good intentions. The dealer leaned forward. But if you got information, maybe we can trade. Word on the street is bounties are going up. Government's cracking down on illegals, offering 7,000 for live captures now. Silas's blood went cold. I don't know anything about illegals. No? The dealer's smile widened. Funny, you got that look about you lately. That look people get when they're protecting something. He paused. Someone. Every instinct screamed at Silas to run, to deny, to protect what little he'd built in the past 4 days. But Kale was dying and pride was another luxury he couldn't afford. The medicine, he said evenly. Name your price. The dealer considered. Double what you're holding. Call it 125, we got a deal. I don't have. Then you better get creative. Kane, because that kid, he stopped. Caught himself, but the damage was done. That kid. He'd said kid, not dog. He knew, somehow he knew. Silas forced his expression to remain neutral. When do you need the money? 24 hours. After that, price goes up again. Or I find other buyers for what I know. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Silas took the medicine, a single bottle of antibiotics, a pack of fever reducers, and left without another word. Outside, the city hummed with life. Thousands of people moving through their days, utterly unaware that everything was balanced on a knife's edge. He had 24 hours to find 62 credits. Or to run. When he got back to the apartment, Lyria took one look at his face and understood. They know, she said. Not for certain, but they're suspicious, and suspicion is enough. He handed her the medicine. Get Cale started on this. 2 pills now, 2 every 6 hours. Silas. We need to move tonight. I know a place. Old service tunnels under the factory district. They're condemned, which means no patrols. We can hide there until I figure out what's next. You are talking about running. About becoming fugitive. I'm talking about keeping you alive. Why? The question was quiet but heavy with meaning. You do not know us. We are nothing to you. Why risk everything? Silas looked at Cale, at Sarah, at Rex sitting guard by the door. Why? Because somewhere in the past 4 days, this cramped apartment had started to feel less empty. Because he'd heard Sarah laugh when Rex licked her face, and that sound had unlocked something in his chest he thought had died with Marcus. Because Lyria looked at her children the same way. Elena had looked at their son with a fierce, desperate love that said, I will burn the world down before I let anything hurt you. Because they were a family, and he'd forgotten what that felt like. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Lyria's eyes shimmered, not with tears. The Cathara didn't cry like humans did, but with something that looked like starlight breaking. On my world we have a word, Kareshnai. It means one who shelters the lost. It is the highest honor we give. I'm not looking for honor. I know that is why you have it. They moved at midnight, when the streets were at their emptiest and the patrol drones were switching shifts. Silas carried Cale, the child's fever-hot body pressed against his chest. Lyria held Sarah and Rex led the way, ears pricked, every sense alert. The service tunnels were exactly as Silas remembered. Dark, damp, smelling of rust and old water. But they were large enough for all of them. And the entrance was hidden behind a collapsed wall that you'd only find if you knew where to look. He'd worked in these tunnels once, back before the factory explosion, before everything fell apart. He knew their layout, knew which sections were stable and which would collapse if you breathed wrong, knew where the old maintenance rooms were, some still containing cots and blankets from when workers pulled overnight shifts. They found a room in the deepest section, far from the entrance. Silas spread out the blankets he'd grabbed from his apartment, made a nest of fabric and cardboard that was nowhere near comfortable but at least dry. Kyle was already asleep, his breathing steadier now that the medicine had kicked in. Sarah curled against her mother, thumb in her mouth, exhausted. Only Lyria remained awake, sitting with her back against the concrete wall, watching Silas with those luminous eyes. You left everything, she said. Your home, your job, your life. Wasn't much of a life. Silas settled against the opposite wall, Rex pressing against his leg. Lost the parts that mattered a long time ago. Your family? He nodded, didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. Pain recognizes pain, Lyria said softly. I see it in you. The same hollowness I felt when the Vrel took my mate. My parents, my world. You walk through life like a ghost. Maybe I am. Silas scratched Rex's ears. Ghost with a dog. But you still helped us. Even ghosts, it seems, can choose kindness. Or stupidity. Jury's still out. Lyria almost smiled. I do not think you are stupid, Silas Kane. Lost, perhaps. But not stupid. They sat in silence, 2 broken people in a broken world, sheltering the last fragments of hope between them. For 6 days, the tunnels were their sanctuary. Cale improved slowly, his fever breaking on the 3rd day, color returning to his skin. Sarah explored the tunnels with childlike wonder, finding beauty in rust patterns and the way sound echoed off concrete. Rex appointed himself guardian, sleeping across the entrance to their room, growling at every distant sound. Silas ventured out twice for supplies, using back routes and staying invisible. Each time he returned with food, water, blankets, things to make the darkness more bearable. At night, when the children slept, Lyria told him stories of Cathara, of cities that grew like coral, organic and alive, of oceans that sang at dawn, of a culture built on art and mathematics and the belief that every life was sacred. We were not perfect, she said. No people are. But we tried. We built systems to care for the vulnerable, to ensure no one starved while others feasted. We believed that civilization was measured not by how high we could build, but by how well we protected the smallest among us. Sounds nice, Silas said. Too nice for reality. Perhaps. But reality is what we make it. Your world chose cruelty. Mine chose compassion. Both are possible. Both are real. And look where compassion got you, extinct. Lyria's expression hardened. The Vrel destroyed us. That does not mean compassion was weakness. It means evil exists. But so does good. You are proof of that. I'm not good. I'm just tired of being empty. Then maybe that is the same thing. On the seventh day, Rex's growling woke them all. Silas was on his feet immediately, listening. Distant sounds, footsteps, multiple sets, heavy and deliberate. And voices crackling through radios, coordinating. They found us, Lyria whispered, pulling her children close. The dealer. Silas's hands clenched. He must have followed me or tracked me somehow. You should go. Take your dog and go. They want us, not you. I'm not leaving. Silas. I'm not leaving. The footsteps grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, searching, methodical. A voice called out, "We know you're down here. Come out peacefully," and the human walks away. "We only want the aliens." Silas looked at the far wall of the room. Years ago, when he'd worked these tunnels, he'd found an old access shaft that connected to the sewer system. Dangerous, partially flooded, but it led to the river, to possible escape. "Can you swim?" he asked Lyria. "Yes." "Even carrying Sarah?" "I will find a way." He grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, tested its weight. Not much of a weapon, but it was something. "When I give the signal, run for that shaft. Don't look back, don't stop. Get to the river and head north. There's a dock where the old shipping yards used to be. Abandoned buildings. You can hide there." "What are you going to do?" "Buy you time. They will kill you." "Maybe." Silas met her eyes. "But at least I'll die mattering to someone." Before Lyria could protest, Silas stepped into the tunnel. Rex beside him, pipe held ready. The flashlight beam swung toward him, and he got his first look at the hunters, 4 of them, all wearing the black tactical gear of private security. Bounty hunters, not government. Easier to bribe, harder to reason with. "That's far enough," the lead hunter said. His rifle was pointed at the ground, but the message was clear. "We're not here for you, Kane, just step aside." "Can't do that." 7,000 credits for the adult, 3,000 each for the kids. That's enough to buy yourself a new life. Hell, split it with us, you'd walk away with $5,000 easy. Not interested in blood money? The hunter sighed. "Look, man, I get it. You've got a conscience. Good for you. But those things in there, they're not worth dying for. They're not even human. Neither was my dog when my world was falling apart. But he stayed anyway. Guess I'm returning the favor." Rex growled, low and dangerous. The hunters raised their weapons. Everything happened at once. Silas swung the pipe, smashing the lead hunter's rifle aside. Rex launched himself at another hunter, 70 pounds of loyal fury. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the confined space. Silas felt something hot slice across his shoulder, but kept moving, kept fighting. "Run!" he screamed. Behind him, he heard Lyria moving, the children crying, the splash of water as they dropped into the access shaft. A hunter grabbed Silas, slammed him against the wall. He tasted blood, felt ribs crack, but he held on, dragging the fight away from the shaft entrance, away from Lyria and the children. Rex yelped, a sound of pain that cut through everything else. "Rex?" The dog was down, bleeding from a shot to his hind leg, but even wounded, he snarled, positioning himself between the hunters and the access shaft. "Stupid mutt," one hunter muttered, raising his weapon. Silas threw himself forward, taking the shot meant for Rex. Pain exploded in his chest, white-hot and final. He went down hard, the concrete cold against his cheek. Through fading vision, he saw Rex limping toward him, felt the dog's nose pressed against his face, felt warm blood, his own, spreading across the floor. "Go," Silas whispered. "Go with them, boy. Protect them." Rex whined, reluctant, loyal to the last. "Go." The dog hesitated one more moment, then turned and limped toward the access shaft, disappearing into the darkness. The hunters stood over Silas, one of them speaking into a radio. "Target secured. Human casualty. Send medical." But Silas barely heard it. He was thinking of Elena's laugh, of Marcus's small hand, of Lyria's eyes filled with starlight, of Sarah's delight when Rex licked her face. He'd mattered. For a brief, shining moment, he'd mattered to someone. That was enough. Lyria's hands shook as she pulled Sarah from the water. The sewer system had led them to the river, just as Silas had said. Behind her, Cale clung to a piece of driftwood, exhausted but alive. And Rex, the old dog, had caught up to them in the tunnels, bleeding but determined, herding them forward like he'd herded them those first nights. She pulled herself onto the dock, collapsing onto rotted wood. Around them, the abandoned shipping yards loomed like skeletal giants, rusted and forgotten. They'd made it. They were safe. But Silas wasn't with them. Sarah pressed against her, shivering. "Mama, where's the man?" Lyria couldn't answer, could barely breathe past the grief crushing her chest. Rex limped over, something clenched in his jaw. He dropped it at Lyria's feet, Silas's jacket, the one he'd given her that first night. The one that smelled like engine oil and kindness. "He saved us," Cale said quietly. "Why would he do that?" Lyria pulled her children close, felt Rex press against her side. Around them, the city continued its indifferent hum. Millions of lives that would never know or care that one man had chosen compassion over apathy, sacrifice over safety. Because, she said, her voice breaking like wind chimes in a storm, he was Kareshane, one who shelters the lost. She looked up at the stars, at the distant point where Cathara used to exist. And because for a moment he found what he had lost, a reason to live, a reason to die. She stayed there until dawn, holding her children, sheltered by a brave dog, wearing a dead man's jacket. But she was alive. They were all alive, and in a galaxy that had forgotten mercy, that had to mean something. 3 months later, the underground network moved like water, slow, careful, always finding the cracks in the system. Lyria had found them through whispered rumors and desperate hope. An organization of humans who disagreed with their government's policies, who believed that refugees deserved sanctuary, who risked everything to smuggle Cathara families to safe zones in the northern wastes, where government reach was weak and communities had agreed to shelter the unwanted. Lyria and her children were going north. So was Rex, who had become as much a part of their family as any blood relation. On their last night in the city, Lyria stood at the edge of the lower districts, looking back at the glittering towers. Somewhere in that maze of steel and indifference was the apartment where Silas Kane had offered them shelter, the tunnels where he'd made his last stand. She would never know if he'd survived. The underground network had tried to find out, but there were no records, no news reports, just silence. But she remembered. She remembered his quiet kindness, his belief, however fragile, that doing the right thing mattered. The way he'd looked at her children not as aliens or threats, but as people worth protecting. "We go now," the smuggler said, gesturing to the transport, a beat-up cargo truck that had seen better decades. Lyria nodded, lifting Sarah into the truck. Cale climbed up behind her, healthy now, thriving. Rex jumped in last, his leg healed, his eyes still watchful. As the truck pulled away, Lyria took one last look at the city. "Thank you," she whispered to a ghost she'd never see again, "for showing us that humanity, real humanity, still exists, even in the smallest gestures, even in the darkest places." The truck rumbled north, carrying 3 refugees and 1 loyal dog, toward a future that was uncertain but possible. Behind them, the city glittered on, beautiful and cruel and utterly indifferent. But somewhere in its depths, a man had chosen compassion, had chosen to matter. And that choice, however brief, had changed everything. 6 months later, the northern settlement was small, barely 300 people, human and Cathara living side by side in a collection of prefab buildings and repurposed shipping containers. It wasn't much, but it was home. Lyria worked in the gardens now, coaxing vegetables from soil that had been dead for decades. Sarah attended the settlement's makeshift school, learning Earth languages and mathematics alongside human children. Cale helped with repairs, his small hands perfect for the delicate work of rewiring solar panels. Rex, grayer now and slower, spent his days napping in whatever sun he could find, rising only to follow the children when they played. They'd survived. Against every odd, every cruelty, every system designed to erase them, they'd survived. One evening, as Lyria watched the sunset paint the wastes in shades of fire, one of the settlement's founders approached. His name was Chen, and he'd been smuggling refugees for 5 years. Got news from the city, he said. Thought you'd want to know. Lyria's heart clenched. What news? Man named Silas Kane, turns out he didn't die in those tunnels. Chen smiled. He was hospitalized, critical condition. But he pulled through. Took months of recovery, but he's walking again. Lyria's breath stopped. He's alive? More than that. He's been talking. Giving interviews, testifying before committees, telling the story of what happened. About you, about your kids, about the bounty hunters who shot an unarmed man for trying to protect children. Chen's smile widened. Public opinion's shifting. Not everywhere, not fast, but shifting. Some districts are starting to push back against the anti-alien laws. Because of Silas? Because one man's story reminded people what they'd forgotten, that compassion isn't weakness, that protecting the vulnerable isn't naive, that maybe, just maybe, we're better than our worst instincts. Lyria felt tears, real tears. The Cathara. Adaptation to Earth's environment finally complete. Slide down her face. Can I see him? He's trying to reach the northern settlements. Going to take time, he's still on watch lists. Still technically harbored illegal aliens. But yeah. Chen placed a hand on her shoulder. He's coming. Said he wanted to make sure you and your kids were okay. That night, Lyria stood outside her small container home, looking up at the stars. Somewhere among them had been Cathara, beautiful and lost. But here, on this scarred and complicated world, something else was growing. Hope, not the naive kind that ignored reality, but the stubborn, persistent kind that looked at darkness and said, I will light a candle anyway. Sarah came outside, Kale and Rex following. Mama, what are you doing? Lyria gathered them close. This family she'd been born into and this family she'd found. I am remembering, she said, and I am grateful. For what? Kale asked. For a man who saw monsters and chose to see people instead. For a world that, despite everything, still has corners where kindness grows. For the chance to build something better. She looked at her children, at the settlement behind them where humans and Cathara laughed together, broke bread together, built a future together. For second chances, she finished, and for the brave souls who make them possible. Rex pressed against her leg, and Lyria scratched his graying ears. This loyal companion, who had traveled so far from his original purpose, who had chosen, like his human, to protect the lost. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and ancient. But here on the ground, in the space between despair and hope, a different story was being written. One act of kindness at a time, one sheltered soul at a time, one Kareshna at a time. And in the distance, somewhere on a long and dangerous road, Silas Kane walked north, toward a family that wasn't his by blood but was his in every way that mattered. Toward home,